And I want to thank the organizers for bringing us together. And part of my talk today will be, and our interaction today will be about having come together, okay, what next? So thank you to the Ward Foundation and the Institute for War Trauma Foundation and the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, and particularly Frederica and Marianne. Thank you so much for, again, bringing us all together and having this conversation. I also bring greetings from Eastern Mennonite University, the Center for Justice and Peacebuilding. It is a place that is known as a peacebuilding university. In fact, that's somewhere in our title. And that actually goes back historically to a trauma that occurred to a group called Anabaptists who eventually became Mennonites 500 years ago. And that played a significant role in shaping our identity and our worldview. There's an underlying faith behind all that and a particular belief system about peace and justice. But that traumatic event, which happened in Zurich, Switzerland 500 years ago, and impacted a whole group of people in very, very, very negative ways. It was something that shaped who we are in our ongoing belief of nonviolence, because we were highly violated as a people, drawn and quartered, killed in different ways. And the interesting thing about that particular story and people is that people were incarcerated at the time, and they wrote letters. They were able to write letters to their loved ones, their family members, and that were eventually gotten to the family members. And those letters were kept and eventually put into a book, which was called The Martyr's Mirror. And that book actually helped in what I believe the healing process of the people. And so, yes, it was a very difficult time and historical trauma, but that book allowed people to see what happened to them and process what happened to them and believe in what happened to them as something important in their lives, horrible as it was. So we have these traumas collectively, but we also have potentially collective ways of dealing with them. It just so happens that one of the collective ways that Mennonites deal with it is through four-part harmony singing. And so it's a way of releasing and celebrating at the same time. As a peacebuilding university, we also try to train people as reflective thinkers and reflective practitioners. So reflecting on the theories of peacebuilding and reflecting on who we are as peace builders. And I think this is probably critical to all of us. How much do we reflect on who I am doing the work that I do as a human being, but doing the work that I do in a particular context? And that has been mentioned here, and I want to emphasize that a little bit later. The title for this particular talk is Articulating the Nexus Between Peacebuilding and Mental Health Psychosocial Support Towards Enhanced Intersectoral Coordination. The idea is that we want to enhance our work and find out more about each other and to enhance that cooperation. I'll be talking about coordination, cooperation, and integration. These two things that we might be wanting to think about of how we from this room can go forward in concrete, pragmatic, and caring ways with each other to work together and do the work in an expanded manner. By the fact that we're here, we're already saying that's a good thing. And by the fact that we're here, there are people in this room that have already been working across that bridge of peace building and mental health, psychosocial support. In our time together, I'd like to do a number of things. The first thing is we're going to watch a video, and it just so happens there's a person in this room who's in that video. I also want to share with you what peacebuilding is as we teach and practice it at the Center for Justice and Peacebuilding. And I have a model, and I really appreciate Ivana's models that were up here from our Trump Foundation, where we have to, I think, use these models. They're not perfect, but at the same time they kind of draw us in because they're universal. They're kind of archetypal in one sense. And we get it. We can see more clearly through models. And I'm going to try to explain that, what peacebuilding is, through a particular model. I call it the Peacebuilding Wheel. I also want, and this hopefully is a model that we use in our educational process, but that's what I want to be talking about more and more today, is how we can use education, educating each other about our particular disciplines in a way that we can actually build that bridge and work towards a greater coordination. I also want to discuss the meaning of coordination and collaboration and integration, just for the purpose of understanding how we decide what we're going to do together. Are we going to collaborate? Are we going to coordinate? Are we going to integrate? And we'll just describe those a little bit more in detail. And finally, we're going to do a little action research right here. I'm going to actually ask you at tables, and I'll explain this more later, of kind of brainstorming together about this bridging of our particular fields and how we might enhance that coordination in a way that's going to benefit us all. So the video you're about to see is one of many I've designed and created out of research that I did 2 years ago related to the subjects that we've been talking about here. My main question was, how do we further integrate psychosocial trauma understandings and recovery well-being into the peacebuilding field? I say further because for 18 years, that's exactly what we've been teaching at the Center for Justice and Peacebuilding. This interface, this nexus, this relationship between the mental health, psychosocial support, although we didn't always term it that way. We've used terms like trauma awareness and even trauma healing. And I have some problems with that particular term, although it's very real. And trauma recovery types of things. But seeing the necessity, as we've been hearing very, very clearly through this whole conference, of the need for all of these things. And of course, it's not just psychosocial support and mental health and peace building. It's all these other things out there as well that need to come together to create a more holistic understanding of going forward when we're working with all the complexities and the emerging issues and systems that we have to deal with in our reality, in our world. So pay attention to this video. It's very short, but I'd like you to kind of lift out what some of the barriers might be of this bridge building, if you like, and what some possibilities are. And we'll discuss that briefly and then move on to some other things. That's with an I-A-L.
I think that we have created a world where people specialize so much in different things that the only way we can think of cooperation is our little guild of specialists cooperating and working with another guild of specialists. And I think as a result of that, we create answers to problems in a way that is segregated and differentiated.
I see the areas being more and more fragmented, more and more private initiatives, more and more actors, less willingness to be coordinated. So I think it's a very difficult situation.
For me, I see a round table. I see a round table of development agents, funding agencies, psychologists, psychiatrists, community social workers, church leaders or religious groups. I see these people sitting on the same table and saying, guys, can we integrate what we are doing and come up with a model that can be applied across the board?
People are independent. The organization are built according to their goals, their vision, and their mission and principles that they put forward. And most of the time, they have also a group of supporters who look at those very narrow aspects of their work, and they are all contented in doing that kind of work by themselves. They believe strongly they are changing the world, and I don't deny that. In a small way, they are changing the world, but using that kind of path. There are several ways I can see recreating synergy among themselves. Practically, on the ground, if we can create a scenario whereby we create space for these people to come together and discuss their work and see the point of convergence and start working together, that's one way. They will continue to be independent and doing those things, but they know there is a time and space that will be created for us to compare notes and say this is what we are observing in our field and this is how we can help in a comprehensive way the communities.
MIT has managed to figure out that if you want to solve a problem, you put a whole lot of people together with different frameworks and understandings, and you will create a different solution to that problem. And I'm not sure if at a social level we have fully grasped that. So we're still, and as I say, this is the theory rather than the practice, I think we're still existing within this world of multidisciplinary ways. And yes, we need greater cooperation, and we need the development part of the UN to speak to the children's part, but actually I think we have to change that whole framework and start to conceptualize the problem differently, and that would lead to a different way of thinking about it. But as I say, that's the theory. I'm not quite sure how you actually physically go around and actually do that.
By engaging people in reflection around some concepts that can expand their understanding of the issues they're dealing with, and giving also the capacity to explore possibilities that exist, probably not in their midst, but outside there. They can take on these opportunities and address their situation in a more comprehensive and sustainable way, just by creating those spaces for them to interact and look at these possibilities that exist. Then we crystallize that commonality of purpose and give them the direction where they need to lead their country.
So, very quickly, what did you hear there? What are some of the barriers? What are some of the possibilities? And again, I think what we hear everyone was talking about, not just two groups, but multiple groups talking to each other. Right? I'd like you to think maybe within the terms of what we're doing here today, how do we build bridges? But what did you hear? What are the barriers? Yes?
People don't want to be coordinated.
They don't want to be coordinated. Right. Interesting. That could be true with all of us individually. Yes?
We see the world differently.
We see the world differently. Excellent. Yes.
Contented in their own small.
Contented in their own small ways. Yes.
The assumptions of international aid and where it actually starts. And the assumption is everybody's being able to make rational decisions if you give them rational options.
Interesting. Yes.
We all think we're heroes.
What?
We all think we're heroes.
Yes, we're indeed heroes. That's true. Oh, we think.
Yeah. Kind of loss of hope or loss of, I saw that actually my PhD supervisor. And I didn't know he was so depressed.
This was 30 seconds of an hour and a half. So he was actually much more joyous than but he was depressed about that one.
They didn't mention the competition amongst ourselves for funding.
Yes.
And it's only that much, and how we claim results and how we go for funding in a way that really doesn't, that the context in which we work doesn't facilitate cooperation.
Right. One thing that's interesting about that is that funding organizations are asking us to come together. And so one group, one NGO or international NGO will call other NGOs to be partners so that they can apply for this money, because the requirement of the funder is that. And we do that, but we still don't talk to each other about how we're going to intervene.
Actually, my general takeaway was that you have super wonderful analysis, but nobody dares to point some out and not actually do that.
Oh, is that right? I heard some things.
I'm sorry, by the way, for the gentleman who was in the video, of course, who actually said nothing after that.
Well, we need to go to that gentleman in a minute, what he's thinking 2 years on.
I think organizational cultures and I think intellectual arrogances. So every organization creates its own culture, its own models, and they'll fight to keep those intact. And so the idea of merging and discussing and blending models, or at least accommodating models, and the ideas and the programs is I think it's a non-starter in most cases.
Even with your video made me think of the International Committee of the Red Cross where I worked 7 years. And I thought that there is inability sometimes to talk with the other women too. So it's like a compartmentalized approach to action. And so we talk about dialogue within the communities that we work with. But maybe that dialogue does not exist within either, and it's beyond, you don't have to go too far, it's just within your own organization.
Right. Maybe not only the dialogue, but the self-care, or a greater possibility of dialoguing constructively and creatively.
Yes, what I always find fascinating is that actually we are all aware of it, and we are still part of it ourselves. So the whole culture within organizations at each level knows this. It's not a new discussion.
Right, yeah.
So how come we don't change it somehow?
That's what we're going to do today. This is the beginning of change.
But I think building onto that, it's almost like the parallel processes. In the different communities that we're looking at, how do we engage, how do we better engage, how do we include people, not exclude people, recognizing this connection that trauma creates, yet we don't always recognize it, one, for ourselves, or the impact on ourselves, or how we kind of processing that disconnection. So maybe that it's a trauma impact as well.
Good point. Yes, sir.
I think the reason why the organization don't change, though they hear this thing, is because they have their own personal interest, fulfill other than what really the people there on the ground, the services they need, really require. Somehow our own baggage is along as we walk.
That's a very good point, and we'll try to discuss that even a little bit more. Yes, sir.
One explanation would be quite simple, that when you expand it like that, the problem looks too big.
Yeah.
And like all things when you're beginning, when it looks too big, there's a reluctance. If I go in, am I going to make a difference? If I change anything, how can we manage it?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, we're wondering about whether it's also about interests, whether I lose out on interests if I share it with you. And so the question always becomes, what's in it for me?
Exactly, and that's one thing we really want to talk about, our own value systems, and how we both view the world in terms of those value systems, and how we view our bottom lines in terms of the economics of the issues, how we view our status as people in the field, as not only heroes, but I'm a better hero than you are, or you're better than I. Yeah, those types of things. Brandon, any further word 2 years on?
Well, I mean, maybe what I'd say is that sort of fragmentation, I mean, we were talking at quite a macro level about the UN and other sort of structures, and I've been involved in some of those discussions since then with UNDP and other people, and I think there is a sort of growing recognition of that they need to try and link all these things together, but I'm not convinced it's moved much further than what that conveys. At a personal level, and maybe it's about what someone said there about the problem being too big. So I mean, at a personal level, what I've started to do and what we've started to do at our institute is to start to try and build relationships with different groups of people. And when I used the MIT example there, I was trying to talk not just about linking like psychologists, social workers, and peace builders, but actually linking architects and engineers and doctors. You know, like and so we've really started to try and do that. So to work more like closer with our art department and link the art department into our conflict resolution stuff, linking our architecture department into our conflict resolution stuff, our computer and technology. You know, so at a practical level, I try to scale it down. And I mean, last year we launched a thing called the Peace and Technology, the Peace and Social Innovation Laboratory.
Right.
And the idea was to bring all these different people together. So I mean, we've tried to start to experiment with doing that. Is at a personal level, that's what I try to do, because the top is just too frustrating.
Well, and I think that is the case. I mean, there are many NGOs internally that are saying we need these different disciplines within our organization. So we're going to draw more people in with those disciplines. It's one sense you can control it better. You can say exactly what you want in that regard. You're not having to build these bridges across INGOs or other organizations. It's easier to do. Yes.
I just wanted to kind of nuance slightly the idea of the disconnect within organizations and say, I mean, the frameworks that are brought in are international norms and frameworks which are applied into national and local contexts, which are very rarely translated down through international staff to national staff, and very rarely discussed to a degree that actually there is no free conversation that allows that to grow into something that is actually truly national and local. And I think that's fundamentally the real kind of, it's professional, it's cultural, it's social. I think there's a whole load of dimensions there, some of them very ugly and disagreeable.
Well, and that goes to your values and your practice approaches. And, is it bottom up, is it top down, is it a combination? Let me move on. Thank you. That's very powerful. And I'm just going to show you this model that we work with, and it's a theoretical model for practice. I want to emphasize that. And these are master's students who are coming into our program mid-career sometimes, or the early part of their career, having worked in the field for a number of years. And what we want for them is to take this back into their own organizations and to, yes, work within the organizations to have maybe a multidisciplinary approach, but also to see when they're working locally with local partners as well as maybe with international partners, how they can better interface and link to each other. And we're not going to do this perfectly, but at the same time, we're not aware of the need to do that more definitively, I would say, because we are becoming more and more aware. And why, I think we know that why, but maybe we can talk about the hows and the whats and the whens more today. I call this the kind of education, a theoretical model for practice that we use. Now, I said here a model for social reconstruction after complex and violent conflict. That sounds, pretty heady, but I also believe that peace building is not just for post-war situations or violent conflict situations. It can be used in disaster situations as well that have human elements to them. And it should be used, from my perspective, as a norm. And I'll say more about that in stable societies. So this is a very basic kind of 10 sections of this wheel. I mean, I had to select, 10 instead of 200, but at the same time, I wanted to, people kept asking, what is peace building? What is peace building? Well, it's conflict resolution, it's conflict transformation, right? They're all the same. And I was saying, no, they're similar, they have some similar meanings and ways of going about doing things, but they're different. And you'll notice here, I put psychosocial, trauma, well-being at the top. It doesn't have to be at the top because this wheel turns forward. In stable societies with values that inflate the inner tube of this tire helps, if everything is working together in some shape or form, the tire or the wheel goes forward. But my first exposure to bringing trauma awareness, healing, recovery, and this was early on in the 1990s, was when I was seconded from the Mennonite Central Committee. I'll explain that at some point if people want, to the Christian Health Association of Liberia. And that organization handled, before the civil conflict there, 42% of all the healthcare work in Liberia. It was a large, large NGO, and it had sister organizations around Africa, a dozen. And it's, I was asked to come in because the people that were doing the community health and the health for their country, whether it was distribution of medicines or drilling wells or training midwives, a whole range of things that they were doing already. They knew in the early 90s, because there was a lull in the fighting, and they actually thought it was the end of the civil crisis, and it wasn't, that they needed some help or expertise or understanding of ethnic conflict and identity issues. And I had some of that background. I had some background in this difficult term, reconciliation. And so they asked me to set up a center for trauma healing and reconciliation. That was the title of the center. And we hired an educator with a master's degree in psychology, and we were off and running. So what our goal was, really, was to merge my background in what was called conflict resolution and analysis at the time with the psychological, emotional elements that we were experiencing in Liberia around stress and trauma. So we attempted to do that. And out of that experience, I took some of that understanding and learning and contextualized it when we worked in Bosnia. And out of the Bosnian experience, this emerged, this peacebuilding wheel. So we have this as education. Multiple types of education are important for peacebuilding. Education at the elementary level to the highest levels, community-based education around numerous issues, but that there's an equity across the board that people are getting educated. Education could be seen as a tangible issue with schools and books and learning of that nature, whereas identity and worldview has more of an intangible sense to it. We've talked here extensively about the importance of identity, and we've mentioned worldview, and of course culture informs our identities and worldviews and vice versa. But understanding its implications in a conflict situation is highly critical, and that's been noted here a number of times. Justice, we've just talked about that. Everything from distributive justice to transitional justice to traditional justice mechanisms, restorative justice. And I'm a real proponent. One of the things that we teach at our center is restorative justice in that larger framework of transitional justice and community-based justice. And so obviously, a very important element in doing peace. Conflict transformation. So that could be at the center for some people, and for other people, development could be at the center, and for other people, mental health and psychosocial support could be at the center. But conflict transformation, and I've mentioned analysis here a number of times, it's absolutely critical to do an extensive analysis with all the stakeholder mapping and the systems mapping and your various models and pyramids and so forth that are critical to understanding what's going on in the context before you do anything of intervention or practices on the ground. And out of conflict transformation and this analysis is what we call theories of change. We have to develop these understandings and the basic theory of change. If we do thus and so, then this will happen. But that only comes out of a very, very deep analysis. And sometimes our analysis or our assessments are not as extensive as they should be. Of course, then, we're in this framework of time and money, and we can't do what may be necessary. And that's problematic. So we push back oftentimes and say we need more time to do the analysis before we can even think about doing any kind of practice or intervention. Religion and spirituality, very important in many parts, if not all parts of the world. Understanding the practices and what they mean, how people view the spirit world, for example, or how people view forgiveness and reconciliation from a Muslim or Christian perspective or a Jewish perspective, whatever it might be. All these things are critical in our understanding of working with people and doing the peace building. Leadership, we've mentioned that extensively as well. It needs to be principled, which is always an issue. People need to lead from the light and not from the shadows. And the capabilities need to be at all levels. So leadership training, working with leaders, challenging leaders, as we did after the Rwandan genocide. A lot of the religious leaders were meeting in Nairobi, and we were asking them, well, what about your own stress and trauma from this issue? And of course, everybody responds differently to traumatic events, but they said, no, we don't have any, we need to work with our people on these things. 10 years later, the woman you saw, Dr. Babiti, she said 10 years later, after the genocide, the religious leaders were willing to start talking about their own stress and trauma. They couldn't do it straight away, and maybe rightly so, because they were seen to be leaders. But sometimes it's good to be vulnerable as a leader and to help the people that you work with and lead to see that you too are like them and can experience these things. Another intangible, maybe, although it's both tangible, is space. How do we create those physical spaces for these dialogues to take place? What about the emotional space, that interior space that needs to be addressed, and the relational space for people to actually come to some type of understanding of what has happened in the conflict, so they can come to potentially to choose forgiveness and to choose reconciliation. And I emphasize choosing, because it can't be forced upon anybody, and it certainly needs to be understood contextually, and timing is always an issue. So that choice is at least there and presenting spaces for that to happen. Humanitarian assistance and development can be seen clearly as important and tangible issues that need to take place. We need to have strategies and initiatives. And security. And we talk about human security here. That's the ultimate, I think, that we need to make sure people feel secure, that they have protection, and that there are early warning systems to prevent further violence. So again, we could add to this. Sometimes I give people a blank wheel and say, you fill it in for your context and your setting. But the idea here is that we're using this model. It's a theoretical model, but it can be a practical model as well, used as a template over a conflict as part of the analysis. So you start to see your entree points into a particular conflict, or your multiple entree points, or the people you need to work with in different organizations to enter into a particular conflict or post-conflict situation, post-violent situation. Because you can't do it. Your organization is not set up to do it, but your analysis potentially is seeing what is necessary, and therefore who is necessary, what group is necessary to partner with you to enter into that. And of course, we very clearly pay attention to what we've talked about here extensively, is the wisdom of the people that we may be called in to work with. And maybe that calling in is also an issue. We have 10 criteria at our center, because we're a practice center as well. And if people ask us to come in and we don't feel we can meet the criteria of their needs, we say no. It doesn't mean we won't recommend other people or other approaches that they might take, but we're not the right group to enter into that. And yeah, there might be money behind it, but our value system says no to that. So I've talked about these values that inflate that tire around the wheel, and they come from all sections of the wheel. And of course, we all have different values. But I think a lot of the values that we have are similar in the sense that we want to meet the human needs of people. We want to pay attention to their rights as much as we can, depending on our abilities to do that. And certainly the dignity of people. I've mentioned to a few of you here already Donna Hicks' book on dignity, its essential role in resolving conflict. And it's a very powerful book. She's a psychologist from Harvard who's been doing a lot of high-level peace-building work. And she noticed that in all of these negotiations, people had the ability to come up with creative ideas towards solutions to their problems, but they couldn't cross the bridge to actually put those solutions into kind of a practical process. And she felt, this was her epiphany at least, that the thing that was missing was dignity. That people were not honoring the other, or hadn't been honored in the past. And so she set up structures and ways of actually helping people see what has happened to them. Her definition of dignity is a feeling of inherent value and worth. And we know when we have not felt that from others. And of course, we know when we've felt that from others, and we know when we've been able to honor others. And when we honor others, we honor ourselves, and that Ubuntu quality of connectedness is reestablished. The bond that was broken is reestablished. All nice words. We have to practice that and operationalize it. Other values that we talk about at our center are empowerment, nonviolence, multiplicity of truth. We don't necessarily, I mean, you may have a higher truth that you believe in, but there are many truths out there that we have to pay attention to. Respect, and I would oftentimes use the term deep respect, similar to dignity, but not quite the same. Interconnectedness and interdependency as well. Mutuality, responsibility, and accountability. The restorative justice concept that we've talked about, you know, it's rebuilding relationships, both between, say, victim and offender, we want to use those terms, which are problematic in themselves, but also with the community, and but it's not without accountability. It's not without people taking responsibility. And so we can misuse restorative justice practices by, you know, getting those people to talk to each other and respect each other in one sense. But what about the accountability towards what actually happened? How does that manifest? And how does that manifest culturally and contextually? Because it manifests differently. So. And you notice I didn't have in the wheel reconciliation. But I believe reconciliation is a value, an underlying value in one sense, although sometimes we don't arrive at reconciliation. And reconciliation itself is a process. And it's part of that peace-building process, I believe. And or a potential outcome of the process. And of course, an outcome doesn't mean that it's stopped, but it is something that we've gone through, and people have in some ways been reconciled to go forward in their ongoing life process. So, something, you know, Maura Dugan's nested model here, but we believe that peace building works strategically at all levels of society. If it's around conflict or something else, it doesn't have to be conflict. And that you, as part of the analysis, you have to see the specific thing that you're dealing with and how it's nested in these other issues, all the way up to the international influences and impacting on a local conflict. So paying close attention to that. So it works strategically. And you don't get to the strategy, we believe, without the analysis and the theories of change and so forth. So it promotes just and sustainable social, economic, and political structures and relationships. So this, you know, does go beyond mental health and psychosocial support, although psychosocial support includes sometimes economic issues and other things. But it's looking at these larger structures at all levels. And relationships. So it's really important because it was mentioned, I think, on the first day that some people talk about peace building, about structures and systems and so forth, and some people talk about it in regard to relationships. And we try and believe very deeply that it's about all of these things. Where do you start? At the structural level, at the relationship level? Again, potentially both, or the analysis may tell us when and how. We have to engage on the short-term issues, and then we have to respond to the long-term issues as well. Again, to build capacity and things that you know about very well. And again, they're not easy to do. So. And I said this earlier, but I don't believe it's limited to, you know, post-war situations or post-complex violent situations. in natural disasters, for example, in the United States, Hurricane Katrina, it was a natural disaster, but what happened was the infrastructure was not built well in terms of keeping water out, particularly the low-lying areas where oftentimes the poorer members of the community lived, and so they were wiped out where other people were not. So peacebuilding may have a role there in terms of the politics of all of that, the economics of all that, and so forth. And it's not just about an act of God. So I believe too, why not have peacebuilding as part of our everyday? If we have some stability in our society, how do we maintain that stability? Well, maybe practicing, you know, the benefits of parity in economics and leadership that's not corrupt, and a whole range of things about our psychological and spiritual health. Paying attention to that and using this model as a mechanism, if you like, to what John Burton talks about, prevent conflict. So that actually our society may be stable, and yet we have mediation centers, and we have support centers over here for mental health, and we have these other things. And you know, a lot of communities do have those. But are we talking to each other about them? Do we see our approach to peace in our own community holistically? Looking at the whole person, the whole family, the whole community, the whole society that surrounds us. Again, great words, difficult sometimes to make work, but that's our goal, I think, all of us. So, culture and context, social, political, economic, our environment. You know, some of us say in general, but in the peacebuilding world, we don't pay attention to our environment. You know, all this other work that we're doing, you know, doesn't have, well, it has meaning, but it may be put aside because we're having to wrestle with environmental issues. And of course, a lot of people can't even be thinking about environment because of their everyday struggles, and I understand that. But I think if we who might have a macro level viewpoint of some of these things, we can pay attention and maybe should pay attention more closely to the environment. Gender inequality and engagement is assumed in this model. Of course, it doesn't always happen, and it's different in different parts of our world, obviously, but potentially working towards that is a good thing. And I was just thinking the story of in Afghanistan where the man was washing the dishes and he sent his son down the street to warn him if anybody came along because he didn't want to be embarrassed in that role. I mean, wouldn't it be great to use the theater and the arts and the media to in a humorous way, depict these sorts of things and have people see these in their own context, once removed because the actors are doing this, let's say, but to see some of the problems with that type of attitude or worldview. Not that culture is going to change overnight, certainly not, but somehow I think we can use the arts to help people see some of the strange things that we do and why we do them. So again, this deep analysis, I've mentioned that quite a lot. And we believe that as part of a conflict analysis that we should do a trauma assessment alongside of it, or within it. And I think that's a helpful thing. It pays attention to what's going on from a conflict analysis perspective and a conflict-sensitive perspective, but we're also sensitive to the again, trauma kind of writ large issues as well. And so why not add a number of questions, maybe from the assessment guide there to our conflict assessment, our conflict assessments on the ground. So, and I mentioned theories of change already, and I mentioned these tangible and intangible issues. So tangible issues are the ones we can objectively measure, such as a ceasefire or peace accord, the rebuilding of a community, the digging of wells, whatever it might be. How many people, how many schools we've opened up. But the intangibles are harder to measure, and oftentimes, therefore, we don't attempt to measure them, and we leave them aside. So we're trying to say, no, this is a balance that needs to take place. Some of you, somebody might know who actually said this. I think I've modified this saying, but this goes to another intangible. The moral worlds of individuals and groups of people have been fractured by violence and need to be restored. So their moral worlds, whatever that means and however that's interpreted in a particular context, has been fractured by violence. So how is it restored? And of course, all that we've been talking about, I think, in this conference and all that you do is about that restoration. The other thing that we've done in terms of training is our strategies of trauma awareness and resilience, another educational model for practitioners and trainers, but we've moved that up to our master's level. So it's a 4-credit course now, or set of courses. And it too has always not just been about trauma or resilience. It's been about security, it's been about religion, it's been about a number of things. So we have 5 points of a star, and you can see some of the similar things that I showed on the Peacebuilding Wheel. And we've trained United States Institute for Peace, people going out to different parts of the world, hopefully for the good of all. Mennonite Central Committee, Catholic Relief Services, USAID, 200 people were local aid workers, USAID workers were trained in Liberia with this STAR program. So I mentioned that we talk about coordination, and you might want to kind of jot this down because as we think about it collectively at our tables, we might want to say, is that what we want to do? Coordination, which refers to the sharing of information and avoid duplication or conflict with other actors. Well, that's a type of coordination. Maybe it's not the full definition of coordination that we're talking about here, but it's just about sharing information, being aware that we have information that others may want to use and vice versa, and avoiding duplication. How often does that happen? And certainly conflict with other actors. As you've worked extensively on the ground, I'm sure you've seen the duplication as well as the conflict. So cooperation, it refers to actors with overlapping but distinct missions, where they identify how they can assist each other. So maybe it's cooperation that we want to address more thoroughly, or not, or maybe a combination of these things. And by the way, I'm drawing these definitions from a colleague of mine, Lisa Shirk, who is working at this nexus and coordination of civil society and the military, the U.S. military. Not easy to do. And integration, it refers to actors conducting a joint assessment or analysis, developing overarching theories of change, as well as doing M&E jointly. But, well, they may implement it separately, but they have that base, that broader analytical base and understanding of what the problem is collectively, and then they can go in and implement independently. Because we'll have a quick report from each table. Address some of these questions. How can we collectively think about enhancing this collaboration, coordination, integration towards something realistically as next steps for the work that we could do based on our particular disciplines? Discuss the who, what, when, and how questions related to these next steps. I'm assuming we know why. We really want to help people and care for their needs based on their mental health, their social needs, psychosocial needs, and helping them to develop mechanisms for building peace within their own communities and maybe their families. And so keep in mind that this kind of educational model that I use, but go beyond that. I'll only share 2 things with you that I've thought about, and this is skewing the research, but anyway, you know, is there a pilot program that could come out of this group that say that you're working with, or you're going to start a project, and you say, well, we do the mental health psychosocial support work, but we don't really have a peace-building person here. How can we draw that individual or that group into this work and be willing to do a pilot. Now, a pilot is not something that's going to go on forever, but a pilot is also something that can be tested through monitoring and evaluation to see how it works. And then out of that, a learning that can occur as a result of that, maybe to go forward and to build even more bridges. And the other thing I would just say is that already the IASC, Mental Health Psychosocial Support Guidelines, are out there for emergency situations. Is there a way to merge some peace-building elements into that, or to, as Frederica talked about yesterday, to make that a peace-building addendum to those guidelines? Is that a possibility? Or make new guidelines of the two groups and what that would mean. So I'd ask a recorder at each table to take clear notes, because I'd like to have those notes to reflect on later and get back to you what the findings are. And if we have time, we'll have a quick report from each table. So is that clear, what we're about to do? So make sure you have I just humbly ask you to write legibly so I can read it. So start that discussion. What do you think? What are some concrete next steps out of this conference that can be taken towards enhancing the coordination, collaboration, and/or integration of our particular disciplines?
To recognize that even though we are experts, we can never know everything, and we need to learn from each other. The second thing that we kind of discussed is that we need to create an inventory of who's doing what, where, why, and to get these people together and create a platform in which we can all discuss. But the important thing is we need to commit, everybody needs to commit to the why, and they need to commit to the how.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
For example, bringing in grassroots organizations or managing competition by, for example, applying together for funds. But the power structure and doing something with that was the most important discussion.
And power structure?
We're really talking about the need to develop models of integration, but that those models of integration can't be led by the outside. They have to actually be nationally owned. And what does that mean when from the outside, a lot of the resources are the things that come from that? So the financial and the other pieces. And how do you have a really organic, nationally owned process with these outside kind of forces of things that are always pushing for that type of integration? We also kind of, almost all of us around the table are kind of tired of coordination.
But very much engaged with people who are involved and who are connected. Integrated analysis with local people, driven by local people. So that makes us aware of who is needed, in what doses and what frameworks.
To bring together the perspective from very different backgrounds, and then defining what do we mean by collaboration. And we concluded that it was very difficult to put together the various stories from the field with the theoretical presentations, the more conceptualized analysis. And we thought that we cannot really even define collaboration, that it is the people who would benefit from the work, who can help us define how we can collaborate to bring a better, to optimize the work that we do, and not to duplicate. And so basically it coincides.
I was hearing that much.
By a lot of the comments, but the one thing that was also mentioned here is the fact that, this might be the opportune time to agree on a network, but to bring in policy level people as well. And, based on the leadership issue we had discussions with.
Well, one of ours, we had a similar thing, I think, to this table, but we were trying to get very concrete in saying that one thing that maybe we could do coming out of this conference is that it sounds like there are 16 organizations that are represented here. And so if we could have a concrete database or whatever it might be, but of, again, kind of specifics on what each of those 16 are doing, and also specifically what are the specific needs and gaps for each of those 16, so that we could basically each of those 16 could kind of put out a, put out their call for here's where some of our needs and gaps are, and are there others here that would be able to collaborate or partner or work together in some way on meeting those.
So, are there volunteers to start that process? I mean, I think we need to think about the grassroots, and that's a clear issue that came forward. But we are this group, and are there concrete things that this process that you just talked about might at least give us more information across the various 16 organizations? Volunteers, anyway. What I'll do now, if I could collect these, I'll send them back to the organizers, and possibly from there we can find out what those next steps might be. I really appreciate the work that you've done here. I know it was a short amount of time. I know it's a big issue, but at the same time, I'm hopeful that we can do things concretely. Again, there's all these emerging issues, and things have to be organic as well. But we can take some concrete steps towards a better integration, collaboration, whatever you want to call it. All right, thank you very much. That's it.